watching Capitol Connection from the Illinois State Capitol.
We turn now to our Reporters Roundtable. Joining us this week is Jerry Nowicki with Capitol News Illinois and Doug Finke with the State Journal-Register. Good to have you both with us.
Glad to be here.
Yep, thanks for having us.
Two best beards in the State House Press Corps. First of all, we've seen a lot of reaction this week from local lawmakers, from lawmakers in general, about how to address what we saw happen at this nonprofit Goodwill, which is not all Goodwills across the whole state, but just the ones from Bloomington down to Vandalia, from Quincy over to Danville in the central Illinois region, not including Peoria. That's a different branch there.
Right.
But they have state contracts, and these state contracts are for workers with severe disabilities. That's how the contracts are written. They're specially reserved for that part of the workforce. And now there's been some scrutiny from some lawmakers. What are some of the next steps that you anticipate?
Well, the Senator Andy Minar, who is one of the budget people in the Senate, has asked that the State Department of Human Services, which is where most of these contracts reside, do a audit of sorts just to review how the money is being spent. He wants to make sure the money is being spent the way it's intended to be spent. He's got a real issue with the compensation level of the director of the program of Goodwill here in Springfield. So we can definitely see that. I'm sure that at the end of this, there'll be some kind of hearing of sorts to ask what they learned from this investigation.
And Jerry, what else sort of struck you about this, the lawmaker reaction to it?
Well, the lawmakers for one, but I think there's just going to be a lot of pressure on the board and on the CEO, Sharon Durbin, because the language she used just isn't, there's no respect in it. It's sort of, you posted the video, you did the interviews, and to say they're barely working a job, I think there's going to be a lot of pressure on her from lawmakers, from advocates, from everybody.
Yeah, and we certainly saw the first consequences of some of that pressure earlier this week, and there may still be more yet to come. We'll see how that unfolds. Meanwhile, there was another scathing audit from the Auditor General looking at the Department of Innovation and Technology, which is sort of like the geek squad of Illinois. Is that fair to say? That these are the tech nerds that wire everything together and do the networking? How would you describe Do It if I didn't?
Yeah, the state's lead IT department, basically. They oversee all of the equipment and make sure it's secured, or they're supposed to at least, but the audit basically said they weren't prepared for any technological disasters, and if systems go down, they could stay down for long periods of time, and we actually just saw that. The state's unemployment system was down for 2 days. People got their checks a couple days late, and there was some data loss. They lost 3% of their data during that. I don't know what's been recovered fully or not. I'm still trying to sort of ask some questions on that.
Did anybody miss getting their unemployment check?
They came 2 days late.
So that's a real pain for some people.
Well, if you're relying on that for most of your income, which these people are, you're getting an unemployment check because you're not working, obviously. So if there's a delay in this, that's going to create some hardships for a great many people.
Doug, what's the history here? Because the computer systems, for example, CBS 2 in Chicago just recently reported that the Department of Transportation logs complaints from motorists who drive over potholes. And to do that, they have a computer software system that does it. Would you like to guess which computer software system they're using at the Department of Transportation? It's MS-DOS. Anyone remember that from the 90s?
Right.
It's almost comical.
And that was one of the things when former Governor Rauner created this agency. The idea was to bring all the state's data processing operations under one umbrella, and they were also going to be upgrading equipment. So one of the problems that happens in state government is different agencies have different systems. They can't communicate with each other. So even transmitting basic information that needs to be shared by different agencies, they can't do it very effectively or very efficiently. So they're supposed to upgrade this equipment. That was another finding of the audit, that they are way over budget on doing that, and basically this agency is a mess.
So it's sort of newer, but it sounds like what Doug's describing is that each of these state agencies are quite literally walled off from the others, and that may present challenges if and when they need to share information.
Right.
So what else did the audit tell us about this chance to modernize the state's computer systems?
it detailed missing computers, computers without antivirus software. The program Doug was talking about, it was initially budgeted $250 million. It's cost $400 million, and I don't know how much there is to show for it, but it seemed like they were failing at some of their most basic functions. And this ended in June 2018, so of course
the review period?
Yeah, so the people from Do It are saying, with the new administration, we're working together. Well, we'll see how that turns out. But
that's one of the pains or the perils of these audits, is that they are they take some time to put together, and so they're really kind of giving us a story of what happened years ago. In that time period, though, this affected our veterans too. In July of 2017, the Department of Veterans Affairs had a cyber breach, and the system they use to help process benefit claims for veterans was offline for 6 weeks in some of these Veterans Affairs locations, and they brought it back on, but that created a huge bottleneck when they were putting things through on paper, like they were back in the 1960s all over again.
And that's a good point, because ultimately there are real live people who are affected by this. You start talking about computer systems, and people think, okay, that's off, some esoteric thing that we don't really have to worry about, but it does. It affects people, and the state of Illinois is woefully behind in updating and keeping current with a lot of its information technology systems.
All right, let's shift gears quickly before we let you go. One other thing happening behind the scenes or in court this week that may affect many gun owners in Illinois: the Illinois State Rifle Association filing suit against the Pritzker administration and its recent bill that the governor signed into law, the Gun Dealer Licensing Act, which created a state-level bureaucracy that would also add extra regulations onto gun shops. What was the argument that the State Rifle Association made here, and what's their aim?
There were a couple of arguments made. One, that the state is not prepared to even tell gun dealers what they have to do to comply with the law. I mean, the law requires installation of new security systems, camera surveillance, electronic inventory procedures, that sort of thing. But the state hasn't even developed the rules that have to be in place so that gun dealers can comply with it. And so the law actually went into effect yesterday, I believe, as we tape this, and yet there's nothing there to help these people comply with it. It's also a matter that with the cost of these, installing these things, that the Rifle Association is saying that any number of gun dealers are going to be forced out of business just because they can't comply with the cost.
Yeah, the Rifle Association's press release said, I think less than half have applied for a state license, less than half of the storefront retailer.
So what's their status as of now? If the law's in place, they don't have a license, what's their status?
That wasn't immediately clear to me.
Fascinating. So this legal fight could put gun shops in limbo, theoretically, or quite literally.
It could, but one of the things the Rifle Association is asking for in court is an immediate stay of this law, so that and then ultimately a permanent injunction that would stop it from going into effect. But the fact that gun dealers could suffer some economic harm if the state would try to enforce it at this point, I think would be a pretty compelling argument for the courts to say, let's hold off for a while before we start enforcing it.
And the costs are pretty substantial. A video surveillance system, that's a couple $1,000s. They said $10,000 in the press release. I don't know what those would cost, but I think the license for a storefront is $1,500, if I remember correctly. Over $1,000 for one license, for one state license, and I think the federal one is only, I don't know what the federal one is, but far less than that.
All right. Well, our Reporters Roundtable only comes on once a week. Between now and then, there are 7 chances for you to pick up a paper and read some of their work and stay up to date on what's going on around the state. Jerry and Doug, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
We're back in a moment.